Matthew Golden is shooting up the draft boards. Does that mean he's a realistic target for the Cowboys at 12? We'll break it down on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And on today's show, we're talking about some wide receivers. I'm calling them tier 2 receivers. Landon might disagree with that. But we're looking at 3 receivers that the Cowboys could target in the first 2 days of the draft that would help their wide receiver core. We've talked about Tetairoa McMillan. We've talked about Luther Burden. We've talked about Emeka Egbuka. Let's talk about Matthew Golden, who I know several people now have as wide receiver 1. Landon, you watched the tape. What'd you think?
Yeah, I mean, let's just get into it real quick, and we'll talk about the player himself, because it is interesting to see this guy shooting up the boards, right? Slightly undersized, he has shorter arms, but he has very big hands. I think it's 9.5-inch hands, very sweet feet, easy speed. It looks very natural for him to accelerate. His 40 time made you go back and watch his tape because it can be hard to see at first watch. I think a lot of people have discussed that. But his body control, his routes are very evenly paced. He has like a smooth but fast kind of game to him. And I think that's why it was kind of hard to see that 4.29 is that I think the way he uses his speed is by running all his, I mean, let me just kind of throw numbers out here. This is not tied to anything. I think the way he runs his routes is he runs them at 4.35, all of them. He can hit 4.29. He runs them all at that speed. And then when it's time to break out, that's when you see the real kind of next level speed that he has. But he paces all his routes exactly the same, which makes him a very difficult cover, right? Like, and he's doing that on purpose to kind of lull his corners into sleep. I think he has the speed to blow off the top off the cover and is decent in contested catches situations, but he still is an undersized receiver. So you're not going to want to have him run deep and then, go up against an NFL corner to try to win a contested catch. Like, he's just not physically, up to it against most of these NFL corners. He will, his known speed will create opportunities for him in the NFL. I actually think his 40 time is going to actually help him in the NFL in the sense that I think teams are going to naturally play him off a little bit more. And I think that's exactly what he wants. He wants guys to play off and be afraid of him because this guy loves to like step on corners' toes, right? He loves to get up on you, make you flip your hips and then burst out and get open. He will feast on inexperienced off coverage with stops and then double moves. Big, strong, reliable hands. He snatches the ball, has a high floor because he will get open and he will catch the ball. I think that's the thing about him that I failed to see maybe early on is that I think he's going to be able to be useful immediately just because he has the ability to get open and catch the ball. I mean, he may not be a fully developed down the field receiver yet that you're hoping for with the 4.29 speed, but the ability to get open and to catch the football, he can do that, I think, right now. He has the speed and agility and a feet to break tackles. I mean, you see that with on his tape when he's running routes, but he is like extremely uncreative with the ball in his hands. Like that's my only issue with him is that his biggest downside to me is that once he has the ball in his hands, it's like there are times when I feel like he runs into defenders, right? Instead of trying to avoid them, or he'll make a weird move that doesn't help him and kind of step back. I'd love to see him just catch the ball and get north and south and get going, right? I think he's more of a separation receiver than a yak guy. And he has the look of a high volume wide receiver too, who could be a wide receiver 1 with the right quarterback in the right system. I liked him a lot. I actually did a lot of reshuffling on my wide receiver board after going back and watching some of these guys. And I ended up kind of putting him at the very, very bottom of the red chip tier, which is kind of bottom of the first round. So I liked him a lot. I think he is, like I said, like a lot of these guys, a super high-end wide receiver too, especially for this team. And if you're betting on him being a wide receiver 1, you're probably not going to have a great time.
Let's get to some of the advanced stuff really quickly. 96 percentile receiving grade, which is very good. 51st percentile yards per route run, 40th percentile yards after the catch per reception. And that's what you referenced. Like, he's just not really a yak guy, despite being a really good athlete, right? Like, it's just not his game. 77th percentile separation percentage, 68th percentile single coverage grade, 59th percentile drop rate. The thing that has me more concerned, Landon, is the production. And you don't draft receivers based on production, but you also need them to kind of check thresholds and boxes. And if you look at his numbers, he was pretty unproductive at Houston, the 2 years he was with Houston. 584 yards as a freshman, 400 yards as a sophomore. And then this year, he has 987 yards in 16 games, right? So that's just under 62 receiving yards per game. So I went back and I did the work, and I went and looked at the last 6 receiver drafts, and I looked at every receiver's best season and their yards per game in that best season. Matthew Golden would have the worst yards per game among any receiver drafted in the first round over the last 6 years. And that includes players like Quentin Johnston, Henry Ruggs, Jalen Reagor, Kadarius Toney, Treylon Burks. It's way, way down there. And this is where I'm struggling. It's like, I see the separation. I see him making plays vertically, but man, you could pick a couple of these games. Like, I was watching a game, I think, against Vanderbilt, and there's like one catch. Like, he's just completely invisible in some of these games. And I guess that's what gets me really nervous about like somebody you're drafting at 12 is, if I can watch a full game and I don't see you for an hour and a half, it's a little concerning.
I'm going to make my comment here, and we'll see how well this plays or if this is true. But I am starting to have more and more issues with leaning too heavily on dominator ratings and that sort of thing when teams are when it comes to teams like Texas, Ohio State. I think Shamar Stewart is facing some of this with the Texas A&M stuff. There are a lot of weapons on this Texas offense, and a quarterback who I think has a limited skill set to avail him of those weapons at times. I also would say that Golden didn't come into the season as the wide receiver 1 for the University of Texas. Like,
no, he didn't.
Bond was going to be the main targeted guy. And I think, as they were kind of feeling their way through that, you started to see Golden kind of, rise to the top of that ranking. And I think that that's probably part of the reason, but you're not wrong, right? Like, the fact is that he did not produce. He had even, I would say, some issues in Houston, right?
Yeah.
I would say, I think part of that issue still exists with him in Houston, because if I'm not mistaken, he was there when Tank Dell
was there with Tank Dell. Tank Dell had 1,500 yards and he had 500.
So, yeah, I mean, there certainly was a focus on Tank Dell, and maybe that was part of the reason that he felt like he needed to leave Houston after Tank left. But I do think there is some circumstance, but you're not incorrect in the fact that the things that I see him do and do well, I think will translate, because you could see it, right? Like, I could see him create separation against Georgia corners, right? Like, that feels like that probably translates pretty well into the NFL. But you're right. Like, there isn't a high volume of any of it, right? There's just not like a ton of tape. It's a lot of projection to be sure. You've seen him do it consistently against really high level competition. I think that's why he's granted, and that plus the athletic testing is why he's granted entry here into the first round. But you're not wrong in the sense that if we're going to take him in the first half of the first round, you need to have more than just great athleticism and some production if you're a wide receiver, because we'd like to have a little bit more proof that this is going to translate.
And I'm comparing it to like previous receiver classes, and maybe that's unfair, but like last year, Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, Rome Odunze all had monster numbers, right? If you go back to the 2020 class, the Cowboys got CeeDee Lamb at 17. Go look at the number CeeDee Lamb was posting. And again, that was the Big 12 versus the SEC. I understand. But we're talking about somebody who was averaging 60 receiving yards per game. And in fact, if you remove the playoffs, the college football playoffs, and you just look at the first 12 games that Golden played, and again, I know that they were trying to figure out stuff with Isaiah Bond. He averaged 48 yards a game in the first 12 games of the season. This was somebody who was you look at like the mock drafts and you're like on the grinding the mocks, he was somebody that was considered a 60 or like a late second, third round pick before we got into the college football playoffs. And now he's somebody that's being considered at 12. It just feels like to me, it's too rich, but here's what I'm going to say about Golden. So I can say something good. I think of all the receivers in this class, I think his fit with Dak and CD might make the most sense because of what he does well and how he would fit into this offense. I just don't like the player as much as I like a couple of the other guys in this class.
That's how I feel too, is that I feel like if they took him at 12, it would be a little bit of a reach, but I would probably be okay with it because I think the fit is so nice that maybe it bumps up my overall projection for him going into the NFL.
Yeah. Let's talk about the two Iowa State receivers who, I mean, couldn't be any different from each other. Jayden Higgins, who's getting some more pre-draft love, seeing a couple people put him in the first round. We'll talk about him next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks that you can use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories to even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a couple underdogs as we get a little bit closer to the weekend. I know we haven't had very many so far, but I think they're going to start happening now that we're in the Sweet 16. We'll get to the Elite Eight. FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. And with tournament games happening almost every single day, there's always something fun and exciting to bet on. Plus, the FanDuel app is simple and easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Later, let's talk about Jayden Higgins, who I know a lot of people like in this draft process. 6'4", 214 pounds, and ran in the 4.4s at the NFL Combine. What did you see from him on tape?
Yeah, I've been a big fan of these Iowa State wide receivers for a while. Honestly, these were, if not the two first, then certainly first five guys that I watched in this class. So it was fun to kind of go back and look at my notes and then rewatch them some more and see how I felt about them. But yeah, let's start with Jayden Higgins. Let me start here. My last note is I'm really not sure why he isn't higher rated than he is, especially after having his athleticism confirmed at the Combine. This is my line one with Jayden Higgins. Why aren't we talking more about Jayden Higgins? Like he's 6'4", 214 pounds. He's got 33 and an eighth inch arms, 9 and an eighth inch hands. So he's got long arms, right? He's got the height. He's got the build. He's not like a beanpole. He's 215 at 6'4". That's some decent size. So he's got the body of a big body X receiver. But he has the quickness and explosion that you want to be able to play in the slot. He ran a faster 10-yard split than Burton did, despite being 15 pounds or 10 pounds heavier and 5 inches taller or whatever it is. He runs crisp, precise, has crisp, precise footwork despite being so tall, which is a little bit unusual. You don't see guys that have that kind of feet, the choppy feet. He could win with his route running underneath. He does a good job of varying his stride length to match the situation. He can adjust his track at full speed in route or with the ball in his hands. So you see a lot of him, kind of like moving in one direction and then suddenly just taking a subtle step and then just changing the track subtly to cut inside of a receiver when he's trying to run a route to get inside of him or when he's trying to run away from folks. He just does not drop the ball. Like I watched at least 4 games and I feel like I watched 2 or 3 before. And I'm not sure if I saw him drop a football.
3.3% drop rate in college, which is
that seems really exceptionally low. All he does is run routes well, get open, and catch the ball. I seriously I remember watching him and then thinking, man, I don't feel like this is a guy that I don't feel like he's as good as I think he is, because I hadn't really heard enough about him at that point. He was playing for Iowa State, and I was like, why is this guy like so good? He's not supposed to be so good. And so I was like, okay, here, I'm going to write my evaluations back, and then I'll circle back after I've watched a couple more wide receivers just to get my eyes right. I wasn't wrong. This guy, I think is borderline. I don't do 1-2s anymore, right? Like the borderline 1-2. This guy would be the typical 1-2 if I did. I've been struggling all night and all morning with putting him just on the other side of the red chips or just in the second round. I think in a class where we've elevated Tech McMillan because he is one of the few big body wide receivers that can, move the needle for your offense right away. I don't know why Jayden Higgins isn't getting a similar bump when he not only confirmed his athleticism, but he blew everybody away with his athleticism. So I think the guy's got the tape. He's got the testing. He's had a great offseason. He had a great Senior Bowl. Why is he not a first-round pick?
So this is why I love the draft so much, is that you can have two people who watch a lot of tape, watch the same exact games and have different takeaways.
Man, let's hear it.
So I do like Jayden Higgins, and what I've been trying to do is watch multiple players that are the same type. It's a bad way to say it, but like same.
No, I understand.
Like I watched McMillan and then I watched Higgins back to back. And one of the things that came away that was so shocking to me is how much more flexible McMillan is than Higgins. And I think he's just a way more loose
especially.
hit.
Yeah.
What's that?
In the lower body, especially.
Well, yeah. Yes. And I think that's where maybe I soured a little bit on Higgins. As you watch Tet run some of these routes whether it's like a whip route on the goal line or catching the ball and then getting upfield. Higgins is awesome for a 6'4", 220-pound receiver. Or sorry, McMillan is. And I think Higgins is okay there. And it has me wondering, like, I think he's a good straight line athlete. I think he's explosive, but I don't necessarily always see that burst. And now I'm wondering, like, okay, is he going to have to be more of a big slot in the NFL, or is he somebody that can actually win as an X receiver? The comp that I put down was Kenny Golladay, like when Golladay was good. And that's a really good player. And I think that's somebody that should be drafted inside the top 50. And I still think Higgins is probably somewhere around there. But I put a third round grade on him. I like this tape. I didn't love it.
Here's the thing. I don't think you're necessarily wrong in the sense that he's not Tet McMillan. You're right, the flexibility, and I think he's not going to be able to run whip routes. But that's not what I'm asking my ex receiver to do. So if you're asking him to, I think he has the ability to move around, and like you could put him in the slot, you could put him in Z. But I agree, like I wouldn't feature him that way, right? Like
I think he can be a vertical threat from the X spot, because I think that's my concern. I think he could be like a good possession receiver. I have concerns about him running away from NFL guys.
I think he can, because he has the requisite physicality. The only concern I have there is he going to get called for offensive pass interference a lot in the NFL because he bullies dudes, right? And I'll tell you this, that is the one thing he has over Tet McMillan. Is that
he's way more physical. There's no doubt.
He's way more physical. He plays up to his size a lot more. So I guess here's how I would compare the two: is that Tet is a more versatile, not more explosive. Not like speed.
Not by testing numbers.
But like more dangerous with the ball in his hands. Yeah. More dangerous on the move. I think that Jayden is just the very prototypical X receiver who can play inside. He can play Z. Like, so if you need to move him around, he can do those things. But I love him because I think he's probably the only pure X receiver outside of Tet McMillan who comes in and improves your roster from day one, just because I think he just has all the things to him. He has a little bit of everything you want. Maybe he's not elite in one or two areas, but I think if you're looking for an X receiver, like you're not going to do much better than this, especially outside of the first round. If he falls to you at 44.
Again, I just don't like him maybe as quite as much as you do. There's part of me that just wonders, like, we didn't see Iowa State play a lot of man-to-man, against man-to-man.
Yeah.
We'll talk about this with Jaylin Noel in a second. Like, you just don't see that very often. So I guess my concern is if he's playing on the outside Is he going to have a hard time separating against like press coverage in the NFL? Maybe, but he is big enough, and I think he plays physical enough that it might not matter. I just wonder if it's going to be one of these situations where, I mean, you're going to be used to him being in contested catch situations, but is everything going to be contested? I don't know.
See, I think you're venturing him closer and closer to who was the Ole Miss receiver that had this same knock, and I don't think he's that guy. I think he separates better than the guys that we've worried about before, where they're the great contested catch guys. I mean, Quentin Johnson, I think was
Laquan Treadwell from
Laquan Treadwell, exactly.
Yeah. He's a much better athlete.
He's a much better, and I think that's the thing. Like, I don't think it's fair to pitch. Well, I mean, it's yours. I wouldn't put him in the box of big body receivers who win with contested catches. Like, he separates as far as
he separates better than those guys.
Yes. And so I think that's why I'm not as worried, I guess, as you, that he falls anywhere near that box. I think separation is, I think, where he wins, to be honest.
Okay. Let's talk about the other Iowa State receiver who's been a little bit under the radar, but after a really strong Senior Bowl, what do we think about him? We will get to Jaylin Noel next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day, and find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, let's talk about Jaylin. Is it Noel or Noel? I think it's Noel. I'm pretty sure.
It's Noel. Yeah, Noel. It's not Noel.
Yeah. Noel. Jaylin Noel. A smaller receiver, 5'10", 194 pounds, but ran a 4.39 at the NFL Combine. What did you see when you watched his tape?
Yeah, you said it. Short, but solidly built. I mean, 194 pounds is good build for 5'10", right? Like, that's decent size. I mean, and he's strong. I think he did 23 reps of bench press, if I'm not mistaken, which, again, is not a measurement of strength, but what it is a measurement is, have you been in the weight room? And dude has been in the weight room. There's no doubt about that. Fantastic, explosive athlete, right? Just explosion, speed, and agility are all elite, right? Like, they're all at the top of you're going to get, right? Shifty at full speed. He can sink his hips, change direction, spin, and redirect momentum at will. He stresses DBs out with his hurried pace in his routes. Like, that's the thing, is that, like, he strikes a lot of fear because I think, as opposed to Golden, who kind of runs sort of smooth, and so it's hard to notice his speed, which is kind of the way he likes to run those routes. Noel's like almost kind of violent, and it's like it's hurried, and so it's like everything is hurry up, and I think it makes DBs kind of stressed out because they know how fast he is, right? Again, another guy who likes to step on DB's toes, right? He likes to get up on you quickly, make you make a choice, and then flip your hips. And then once you flip your hips, that's when he's going to break off and make his move. Fast enough to be a threat to beat you downfield, but also a danger to get the ball immediately and take it to the house. Got work as a returner in the past, and he could do that in the NFL as well. And you see that, in his ball carrying after he becomes a ball carrier after catching the football. Will need to work on varying his tempo. Like, that's the thing, right? Is I just talked about how he plays with a very fast tempo, and I think it stresses DBs out. At the same time, in the NFL, it's not going to stress them out as much, right? And what you need to do in the NFL is be able to vary your tempo a little bit in order to kind of throw guys off to, misdirection and that sort of thing. So that's something I think he does need to work on a little bit. Size probably limits him to a slot or a Z only role.
Yeah.
But his athleticism makes him an extremely dangerous version of this type of player. Like, these are interesting players because you're just probably not, I mean, I don't know. We just may not see very many 5'10", 190-pound players that go in the top half of the first round. Golden may be the guy that kind of does that, right? But I think if you're going to have this kind of player, Noel is like the one that you want. If you're going to have a sub 6 foot, sub 200-pound player, you need them to have next level athleticism and agility. And then they also need to know how to use it. He knows how to use it. He's very well, techniqued. So I think that's the thing about him. I would say if Noel was 2 inches taller and 4 pounds heavier, I think we'd be discussing the first round. Noel projects as a solid to very good Robin to any team's Batman.
So yeah, I don't think he has to be a slot only the way that people are talking, because he's over 5'10" and he's over 190.
Yeah.
And again, the bench is 23, which is awesome for any receiver, but it's great for a smaller receiver. So I think he's going to be able to hold up like physically. Like I think he's going to be able to take contact. Some of my knock.
Can I ask real quick? Do you think he'll be good on the line? Like, do you think he'll be good? Could he play the X on a couple of snaps?
Probably, but I don't think that's where you want him
Yeah.
being at full time.
Full time for sure.
Couple of my knocks on him, but I don't think he's good after the catch. I mean, I think he's like just very average. I think you would expect somebody with his explosiveness. Listen to this: 41.5-inch vertical, 134 broad, 6'8" 3 cone, and a 4.17 shuttle. You put those four numbers together and you would think this would be like one of the best receivers in the draft after the catch. It's just not the case, right? Like he's not great.
And he's a returner, which makes that even more surprising that he's not like incredible after the catch.
And I don't think he plays as strong as his weight room strength. And he's not really like a jump ball receiver either. However, man, when I was watching him, I just kept thinking, this is like peak Brandin Cooks. Like when Brandin Cooks was a really good receiver and he was like a high-end number 2, like this is exactly what you want. Somebody that uses his speed and explosiveness to get open, that can play the Z, that can play in the slot. Not going to beat you after the catch, but they're going to be open all the time. And man, you start to look at like Brandin Cooks's numbers and size compared to Noel's, and they're very, very similar. I really like Noel. I liked him better than Higgins. To me, for the Cowboys, I would much prefer Noel over Higgins.
I understand that. I mean, I think that the fit aspect of that certainly makes sense. I think that the Cooks comparison is very interesting, right? Because even down to the fact that I remember watching Cooks coming out of Oregon State and was just being like, how did you end up at Oregon State, right? And that's the same thing with Noel too. It's like, how did you end up at Iowa State? And even beyond that, like how did you end up at Iowa State when they already had a draftable high-end wide receiver, right? So it's again, I had a lot of dissonance watching Jaylin Noel, both Higgins and him, because I watched them early and I'm watching this guy and I'm like, no, like these two Iowa State wide receivers can't be as good as I'm watching the first. I didn't trust my eyes, right? But after going back and after watching all these other guys, I had to move both of these guys up, right? From where my initial rankings were, because I just like the way both of them play. They're very, very different. But I think, to your point, Noel is a great kind of fit to in the same way that we talked about with Golden. I think that Noel and Golden are obviously on similar spectrums, right?
Yeah,
like
Golden's similar. I would take Golden ahead of Noel.
Yeah,
but would I take Golden round 1 versus Noel in round 2 or round 3? Absolutely not.
I mean, I think that's the question, right? And I think, but they're similar. They're on the same spectrum. They're very similar wide receivers, right? They win similarly. They can do a lot of the same kind of similar things. I think Higgins and Tet obviously are kind of on similar spectrums as the backside X, the guys. So I think that's the thing, right? Is that if the price is Golden at 12 or Noel at, I mean, I would take Noel at 44. I don't have an issue with that. So I think that's probably,
so right now on the consensus board, we have Higgins is at 48th overall. So he's like in range with the Cowboys would consider it in the second round. Noel is 80th on the consensus board. So you're looking at somebody that might be available when the Cowboys pick in the third round.
So how do you have these guys stacked?
So grades wise, I have a second round grade on Matthew Golden, a second round grade on Noel, and a third round grade on Higgins. But I will say this, I have Golden significantly higher than Noel. And I think when I stack my board, I'll have Noel and Higgins a lot closer. I really like Noel's tape. That's all I'm going to say. Every time I watch it, I'm like, man, I wish the Cowboys had a guy like this on their team.
I ended up, so I kind of did some shuffling a little bit, but I ended up putting Golden, like I said, bottom of the red chips. So barely bottom of the first round. And then at the very top of the second round, I have all touching tags, Burden, Ibuka, and Higgins, right? And then a little bit further down from that, I have in the middle of the second, I have Noel and Iomanic.
Okay. So you have Golden ahead of Burden right now.
Yeah, I do.
I hate you. All right. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. We'll talk about Burden at another time. I just think he's being overlooked. That's all. I get it though. He's not the perfect receiver. You have to like that style of receiver.
There's some boomer bust to him. We have to admit
I know,
that.
but
we'll talk about him another day. Come on, we gotta go.
Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosier. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.